Hey YouTube, Twig here, bringing you all an update to my Qliphort Yugioh deck profile for October 2020. The Qliphorts have always been a big popular deck with me, being one of the first pendulum decks that I put together when pendulums were first released. Definitely been a good while now since that format, but it was a very powerful deck at the time, and since then we've had cards placed on the ban list, taken off the ban list, and now I'd like to say that the deck is pretty much at what it used to be power-wise back during the original format. It doesn't have the strength to compete with a lot of the decks in today's format, but having Scout and Sacrifice and Towers off of the ban list completely definitely does make for a very, very fun deck. And with Pendulum still being limited in power, I have other ways just to work the deck around to being what it used to be at the time of its #1 deck status. Let's go ahead and get started with the deck profile. So for the Qliphort monsters, I run 3 Qliphort Scout. This is your definite go-to monster, being your main setup card in the deck. Having no monster effects, but pendulum scale effect being you cannot special summon monsters except for Qli monsters. This effect cannot be negated. Once per turn, you can pay 800 life points to add 1 Qli card from your deck to your hand except for Qliphort Scout. So with this, you can even complete your pendulum scale, having the setup needed for your 9 and 1 scales, which are all the different Qliphort monsters we run in the deck. And this card being a level 5 normal monster means it is also searchable with cards like Summoner's Art, which we're definitely running a full max number of, just to have that search power available to us for the most important of the pendulum monsters in the deck. I also run 2 Qliphort Monolith, being another search target. If you already, let's say, have Qliphort Scout in your hand, being able to add Monolith with your Summoner's Art makes for a very handy scale as well. With this one, having no monster effect, just like Qliphort Scout, but its pendulum scale effect being you cannot special summon monsters except for Qli monsters, also not being able to be negated. During your end phase, if you tribute summon this turn, you can draw a number of cards equal to the number of Qli monsters you tributed for the tribute summon this turn. So if you tribute summon 2 Qliphort monsters for one of your bigger Qliphort monsters on the field, you can draw up to the 2 cards, or if you go for your boss monster, 3 cards. Having the draw power with Monolith is a big plus for sure, since you'll be investing a lot of different Qliphort monsters for your summons, and then they'll end up in the pendulum scale, where then you'll only be able to normally pendulum summon them back from the extra monster zone, or if you have the link arrows to do so as well. For some of the other Qliphort monsters you want to tribute for the tribute summons, I run 3 Qliphort Carrier. With this one, it shares the restriction on special summoning for the pendulum scale, and the additional effect of all Qli monsters you control gain 300 attack. And the other Qliphorts share the monster effect of being able to normal summon without tributing. It just makes their attack 1800, and they become level 4. And if you tribute Qliphort Carrier for a Qli monster, you can basically have this card target 1 monster on the field and return it to your opponent's hand. So being able to bounce monsters back to their hand after you summon out your bigger Qliphort monster, which will have an additional effect as well, is very, very strong for sure. And then also being so that they'll be unaffected by all of your opponent's monsters with any level less than the card that you tributed out. Making them unaffected by other monster effects is very, very useful, and that's why we run 3 Carrier, because having this and our next monster be the tribute cards for your Qliphorts, being your Qliphort Helix, having this one make all your opponent's monsters lose 300 attack while it's in the pendulum scale. And when you tribute this one for a Qliphort monster, you can target 1 spell or trap card on the field and destroy it. So if you have Carrier and Helix on the field, when you tribute out one of your bigger Qliphort monsters, you're going to be destroying a spell or trap and bouncing a monster on the field, along with the resource that the bigger boss monster Qliphort will provide also. So max numbers of these, so you always have the resources to go into. For some of the bigger monsters you want to tribute out, I run the 3 Qliphort Stealth, definitely one of my favorites in the deck. I'll also be showing a combo at the end of the video that I like to do to make the most out of Qliphort Scout with Qliphort Stealth, having the attack gain for in the pendulum scale. But when you normal summon this card by tributing a Qliphort monsters, you can target 1 card on the field and return it to the hand. Your opponent cannot activate card or effects in response to this card's activation. So with this, if you make this card the first chain and have the other Qliphort Helix and Qliphort Carriers, your opponent will be able to respond to this card, the chain chain will resolve backwards, and you will be able to bounce back a card on the field along with the monster bounce and the Helix destruction of the other 2 cards after you tribute them. A very, very scary play for sure, and that's why I run 3 stealth. The bounce effect is definitely very, very powerful for the added backup tribute. I also run 2 Qliphort Disc, with this one having the attack gain for the pendulum scale once again, but when it is summoned, it lets you special summon more Qliphort monsters when you tribute summon this card out. 2 Qli monsters from your deck, and then destroy them during the end phase. But we're not limited with the extra deck anymore, since we have our Qliphort Genius to go into with this deck now. So having resources to use with Disc makes it so then we can also get out a target onto the field, so you give us more link arrows for the extra deck to use also. And then for some of the one-ofs for the bigger Qliphort monsters, I run 1 Qliphort Towers. Your boss monster in the deck being unaffected by other cards, having a 300 attack point gain from your pendulum scales makes it all the better, since this card also has 3,000 attack. And you can make your opponent send 1 monster from their hand or their side of the field to the graveyard, their choice. And all special summon monsters lose 500 attack and defense. It is a very, very powerful boss monster, but I only run the 1. It is searchable with cards like Qliphort Scout. Having too many of this card in the hand can be a dead draw, but I am glad that we have it back into power for the deck, especially being a great card to rely on for the tribute, also getting the most out of the draw power with Monolith, and just being that easier to summon out. I also run the 1 Qliphort Cephalopod. It is a life point gain card. We're having a difference in monsters to your opponent in the graveyard, gaining that life back, especially since you will be paying a good amount of it for your Qliphort Scout. And the 1 Qliphort Shell, having this card, use piercing, can hit for some pretty big damage against your opponent when you are seeing them play on the defensive. And just the 2 attack this card can do when it's normal summon by tributing a Qli monster, having that 2nd attack, and if it attacks a defensive monster, that piercing damage can hit for pretty big damage, since this card will be at 2,800 attack points and also either boosted or lowering your opponent's cards also. And then lastly, for the monsters, we are limited to our special summons, but I still like to run the 3 Ash Blossom for the hand trap option in the deck, shutting down your opponent's plays, especially if they go first. If you stop their play and then they just have to settle on a more defensive play, you can easily take that away with the tributes you can do with your Qliphort monsters. And that is it for the monsters. We'll now move on to the spells. One of the best spells in the deck is Sacrifice. Searchable off of Qliphort Scout. You equip only to a Qli monster. It gains 300 attack and cannot be destroyed by battle. The equipped monster can be treated as 2 tributes for the tribute summon of a Qli monster, and if this card is sent from your field to the graveyard, you can add 1 Qli monster from your deck to your hand. Search power, protection for your Qliphort monsters, making the tributes easier so you don't have to use resources. It makes it all the better with this card. Having these 4 different effects to rely on is a strong one for sure on the field. But I'm so glad, because this card used to be at 1 on the ban list, so having it back at full power makes it so even if you just open it up and have other searches, you at least have your option to, dwindle down the amount of monsters you want to invest in for the tribute summon. I also run the 3 summoner arts. These searches are Monolith and Scout, but that's plenty to go off of if you open up one of these cards in your hand. Being able to then search out the other one you need to complete the pendulum scale means you'll be ready for your pendulum summon with all of your other cards. For some of the lower numbers for these spells, I run the 1 Laser Clip. This is another searchable card with Scout. It's a field spell slot as well, so you don't have to worry about it taking up your pendulum scales, since you'll be investing the scales on the spell and trap card zones and some of your other back row for those positions. It basically gives you an additional normal summon for a Qli monster. So just having that additional normal summon means you can summon out a Qliphort monster normally. Let's say you summon out Carrier with the field spell, activating your Carrier for that summon, puts it at a level 4, but then you can use Laser Clip to tribute the Carrier to summon out another, let's say one of the 1 tribute Helix, or even if you have the Sacrifice on the field for that play to go for, counting the 2 tributes for one of the bigger monsters also. And I also run the 2 Pot of Desires. We run multiples of a lot of different cards in this deck, and you can easily get your search and then go for the Desires draw. Depending on what you banish, there's really not anything that, if you hit, as long as you don't hit all the copies of it, it won't affect the deck too much. So I like to draw this for the additional draw power, because you can invest in a lot of plays that if, stopped, you don't really have much to come back off of, aside from, relying on hopefully drawing a card that can help and going for the either Tribute Summon or the Pendulum Summon if you haven't invested any of your cards in one of those plays yet. And lastly, the 1 Harpy's Feather Duster, just for the destruction of your opponent's back row. If you clear out cards like Solemn Strike or Solemn Warning, you can prevent them stopping your Pendulum Summon and then go from your play right then and there using that other card. Or at least they'll have to invest in stopping the Harpy's Feather Duster and then take the other Pendulum Summon you may do. And then that's it for the spells. We'll now move on to the traps. I run the 1 Climate Change. It's a searchable card, like all the other Qli cards in the deck. With Scout, you add up to 3 face-up Qli Pendulum monster cards from your extra deck to your hand. You can activate 1 Climate Change per turn, but recycle power. You can't Pendulum Summon as often from the extra deck, so being able to add them back to your hand to Pendulum Summon makes it that much better of a card. Or even if you need one of your Tribute Summon Qli monsters, you can use this card, add that back to your hand, and then use the cards once again on the field as if you had them normally from your hand. I also run the 1 Skill Drain. This won't stop your, Tribute Summon Qliphort monsters. So if you stop your opponent's monsters, it will, you'll obviously stop your own high-level monsters, but you'll still have Carrier and Helix to rely on for the tributes, and then being able to return and destroy your opponent's cards, keeping that while you still get out your bigger monsters on the field. And even if you normal summon them, they'll retain their original attack and defense, and they won't be limited to their level 4 plays. So you'll be able to have some pretty big boss monsters easily normal summoned out onto the field. And I also run 2 Rivalry of Warlords and 2 Gozen Match. Each player can only control 1 type of monster, and each player can only control 1 attribute of a monster. So with this, you'll be limited to your Qliphort monsters being Machine, Earth, Attribute, which, you don't really go into the extra deck that often. You rely on just your Qliphort monsters, so having these options to take out your opponent's cards make it all the better depending on what you open up. And I wanted to have more of a trap lineup that didn't really focus on, costing life like the Solemn lineup, so you can have more available for your Qliphort Scouts. So I like the continuous traps, keeping them face up in the spell and trap card zone will always give you resources to use, while you can keep your pendulum scales open also. So never have the need to put these where your pendulum scales go. You'll want them for your Qliphort plays. And lastly, for the traps, just 2 lose 1 turn. Once again, going off of the playstyle of the Qliphort deck, as long as you have your setup for your lose 1 turns, you won't be limited to any of your other plays. Having the power to basically stop your opponent's special summons, switching them to defense, and then having the option to go for your tribute summons with yours, being able to use your normal summon and not have to rely on special summons at all while this card's on the field. And that is it for the main deck. We'll now move on to the extra deck. I run the 1 Qliphort Genius. I'll show the Qliphort disc play as well that I love doing, opening up our extra deck for more of our pendulum summons, using this card's arrows, and also getting the added benefit for search power when you summon 2 monsters to the field where this card's arrows point to at the same time, which is meant to do with the pendulum summon also. I also run the 1 Union Carrier. You're not going to go into the link monsters as often in this deck unless you don't have anything in your pendulum scale, so remember that. If you have like a kind of slow game going and you normal summon out the monsters, as long as there's none in your pendulum scale, you can still access your extra deck. I also run the 1 Asa the Earth Charmer, the 1 Mrs. Radiant, the 1 Nightmare Cerberus, the 1 Nightmare Phoenix, the 1 Barricade Board Blocker for the 1 field spell we do run, it helps at times, and the 1 Nightmare Unicorn. For the Xyz monsters, remember the Qliphort cards become level 4 when you normal summon them without tributing, so I run the 1 Gear Gigan X, 1 Tornado Dragon, 1 Abyss Dweller, 1 Gooska, 1 Cowboy, 1 number 39 Utopia, and the 1 S39 Utopia the Lightning. It doesn't happen often, but I like having the level 4 options available to me if I ever do need an extra deck play to rely on. And as for our go-to play, once again, if you open up your Qliphort Scout and you set it in the pendulum scale, you can pay the 800 life to search out the other scale, completing the pendulum summon you can go for. And then depending on what you have in your hand, if you have your Qliphort Helix and your Sacrifice, and the 1 additional monster can either be any of the higher level up monsters, that will go for our play at hand. You can pendulum summon out the 1 Qliphort monster. You haven't taken up your normal summon yet, so then you can go for the Sacrifice play, equipping it onto your Helix, which can then be counted as a tribute for 2 of your Qliphort monsters. You can then tribute out that monster for your Qliphort Stealth, giving you the search effect for your Sacrifice, also giving you the bounce for the Qliphort Stealth. So you'll search off of the Sacrifice, getting another Qliphort you may need, and then being able to bounce a card. You can either bounce a card on your opponent's turn if they already have resources on the field, or you can target your Qliphort Scout, bouncing that back to your hand, and then you can reactivate Scout again, and then pay the 800 life points again, since it is a brand new card on the field, being able to gain access to another Qli card, whether it be Sacrifice, being able to search out that card and equip it, and then also being able to search off of the Sacrifice, you can then grab another spell, being Laser Clip this time, activating it, being able to activate it, getting your additional normal summon, equipping Sacrifice once more, and being able to tribute out for the newly searched card you had, being your Qliphort Disc. And when you tribute out your Qliphort Disc, you get 2 more special summons into the deck, so you can search out Carrier and Helix. For those specials, they will be summoned onto the field, and you can't summon anything aside from Qli monsters features that you can link the two away into your Qliphort Genius, being able to then have this card available for the extra deck summons, which remember not to summon your Qliphort disc to anywhere the arrows will be pointing, because then next turn, having these cards in the extra deck, you can summon them back out onto the field and then use your Qliphort Scout to search for another boss monster to tribute out using those two cards. But that is it for the deck profile. I hope you all enjoy the video. Once again, this is one of my favorite Pendulum decks. It hasn't really seen much play in the last couple years, but I still always love updating it just to see what has changed with the deck and my overall play style. But until next time, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. And as always, Kira Twig out.